clean opinion, we give a qualified or an adverse opinion. So we have to modify the audit opinion and our audit procedure. First, modify audit procedures, and then based on the outcome of those audit procedures, we modify our audit opinion, depending on the outcome. So that's what we talk about when we talk about professional skepticism from an audit perspective. We have the two key things: to increase our ability and our behavior so that we recognize issues and then act on those issues when we find them. So what does it mean? Again, we are, the financial statements belong to the client, and we want to find evidence about what is reported in the financial statements. So we are seeking the truth, right? The true and fairly represent the economic transactions and the financial position of the company. We have to be willing to ask questions, even if we think they're dumb questions. The likelihood is that they're not dumb questions. You don't know, so you need to know. We can't be afraid to ask questions, right? Because something doesn't add up. And if we take an approach where we listen and then we are, kind of mulling it over in our head, we go back and we kind of review the evidence or the client's responses to our inquiries, and then we go back and have whatever works for you to make sure that you're asking the right questions. And no, it doesn't matter if you perceive them as dumb, because they're probably not. And then you want to err on the side of caution. Be open-minded. So remember, in the judgment framework, we talked about a big part of good, one characteristic of good judgment is being flexible. Right? It's not anger on a position and not move from that position. Right? But to be flexible and think through what are the alternatives, right? What are some alternative explanations? Of course, we have to verify, trust but verify. Improve the discussion, right? So you want to, one of the things that's really, of course, as auditors, right, we have a professional relationship with our client, and we're providing a service, right? So auditing is very much a service business. Even though we have the mandate for public trust, we are still providing a service to our clients, right? So we have to be mindful of that as auditors. And one of the things is that we want to try to have a good rapport. We don't want to walk in there like criminal detectives, right? Where we're assuming that the client's committed a crime and we're going to find it. Right? We're going to find out exactly how they committed it, and we are going to turn them in. That is not our role as auditors, right? So we want, and if we approached our clients with the idea, I know you're doing something dirty, guess how long you're going to be on that client, right? You'll be kicked off that client, and the firm might lose the client, right? So we want to have a good relationship with our client. We don't want to make them uncomfortable, and also we want people to feel like when they're telling us something, we're not going to have this gotcha moment because what happens? Then people are very cautious about how they speak with you. They don't give you all the information. You waste time because you're constantly having to go back. It's like pulling teeth to get information from them, right? So you want to have an environment that there's a discourse where there's we're just both trying to get to the same thing here, right? So you want to have an environment where people feel comfortable talking to you, right, and responding to your questions. And of course, you have to obtain persuasive audit evidence. And what I mean by persuasive is that it is relevant and reliable. Right? So it matters who's providing the evidence. Right? And then we know that evidence is not only third-party evidence. We can't do an audit by only getting third-party evidence. It's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. Right? So we want to make sure that we evaluate the reliability of the evidence, whether it's coming from an external source or whether it's coming from an internal source. And of course, it has to be relevant and persuasive because it has to support the audit opinion. right? And that's where you ask yourself, okay, does this make sense? What else? What other alternatives? Does this support my conclusions? All right. So just to kind of tie it back to the questionnaire that you just completed, it's not in any particular order, but remember the questioning mind, right? The questioning mind, there were questions such as, I often reject statements unless I have proof that they are true. So some of us continue to ask the question. Some of us kind of suspend judgment and just listen until, try to make sense of it. My friends tell me that I often question things I see or hear. I frequently question things that I see or hear. One is how someone else perceives you. The other is your perception of your description of yourself. Suspending judgment. I wait to decide on issues until I can get more information. I take my time when making decisions. And this is a challenge, though. This is one of those barriers to being skeptical in an audit environment, right? Why do you think that is? Taking your time to make a decision. Why would that be a barrier in the audit?
Because you're on a deadline?
Right. You're always under the gun. And that's and time pressure. Time pressure is one of the major factors where in situations where the auditors are not as skeptical as they should be. It's because of the time pressure they face. I dislike having to make decisions quickly. I don't like to decide until I've looked at all of the available information. I like to ensure that I consider the most available information before making a decision. So suspending judgment. Search for knowledge. The prospect of learning excites me. Discovering new information is fun. I think that learning is exciting. I like searching for knowledge. I try to determine if what I read or hear is true. I relish learning. So all of that about learning, and knowledge, acquiring knowledge. Right? And that's the thing, you have to be able to go and be willing to put in effort to get to the right answer. So those would be, those are the questions that lead to the evidence, right? The being skeptical about the evidence that is provided to you as an auditor. But also remember, part of it is understanding the people who provide you the evidence, where the evidence is, the source of the evidence. So understanding the evidence providers, and that's where we get to your interpersonal understanding. Remember that, understanding the motivations, understanding or recognizing that people have motivations to do bad things or do wrong, to reporting. And management might have motivations to report aggressively, unfortunately, financial reports. So I'm interested in what causes people to behave the way that they do. So again, remember, people that, well, do they have incentives? Other people's behavior doesn't interest me. And so sometimes we think, right, that as auditors, we're auditing the numbers. So we really don't have to focus on, well, who's providing the numbers? People, right? People are providing the numbers. People give away a lot of information just in their body language. And you don't even have to be able to read body language, all of that, effectively to realize when people might not be upfront with you, they're not being totally upfront, or if they're angry with you every time you walk in the room, they're angry. I mean, gosh, I don't like audits either, but it doesn't make me angry every time I see an auditor, right? So those are kind of clues that, wait a minute, what's going on? Okay. I like to understand the reason for other people's behavior. I seldom consider why people behave in a certain way. The actions people take and the reason for those actions are fascinating. Maybe fascinating is a strong word, but right, that means you're just interested. Like you recognize that you want to read people, right, or get to understand people's motivations. That's what that says. So that's understanding the provider of the evidence. And then acting on evidence. Remember, I talked about it's not enough to just be able to identify, but it's also important to act on what you identify. So that gets to the other two characteristics, the last two characteristics of skeptical behavior. Self-esteem and confidence. I feel good about myself, I'm confident, of my abilities. I'm self-assured. I don't feel sure of myself. I have confidence in myself. Autonomy and self-determination. I often accept other people's explanation. I tend to immediately accept what people tell me. I usually accept things I see, read, or hear. I usually notice inconsistencies. Most often I agree with what others in my group think. It's easy for other people to convince me. Right? So these would be all that would not be good, right? So this is you feel you have your own convictions, right? Your own moral centering, you're unbiased, you're objective, because what? You're gonna listen to your inner self, right? Not necessarily what people are telling you, not even if 10 people are telling you that. You're gonna listen to your inner self before you act. And so that's just an example, just to show what those questions on the scale are trying to get at. That's what it's trying to measure, how they measure those 6 characteristics of skepticism. So my question earlier was, do you think that you can be taught skepticism? And so you have to be, so first of all, you have to recognize, right, when it's important to be skeptical, what situations. And so one of the things that we talk about in training, when you're training, is what are the situations that you can find yourself in that would challenge your ability to be skeptical. That's what so the firms, what they're trying to do is they do on-the-job training, right, and active supervision, because you can tell, because once you learn something or once you see it, and so one of the things that we found is that because fraud is not encountered a lot, right, people don't really see, especially misappropriation of assets. So it's not something that you see all the time. People might not recognize it. So people might not, when we talk about fraud, we'll talk about this a little more. People might not recognize the traits that individuals exhibit when they're engaged in fraudulent activity. Right? So whereas fraudulent financial reporting, we can look at, decisions that the clients made, arguments that they're making to perhaps book, a transaction more aggressively. Right, we have some evidence, but it's harder to determine if somebody's stealing money. Right, we don't know. Right, one of the characteristics is that person has, for example, might be under financial pressure. How do you know that as an auditor? You might not know unless they share that information with you, or there's some rumor mill going around. You don't know, so it's harder to identify some of these things. So you don't always recognize fraudulent behavior. But when you're exposed to it, right, when you're exposed to signs to look for, maybe that person's not going to tell you, but if you notice if there's a certain pattern or something is off with that person, like if you're exposed to traits that signal that, then you're more likely to identify it, right? And the same thing with skepticism. If you're exposed to active supervision and on-the-job training about what skepticism looks like, or what situations should raise a red flag, then you're more likely to exhibit the skeptical behavior going forward. You also want to encourage staff, right? What they should be doing is encourage staff to be involved. Right? Encourage it. So one of the SAS 99 talks about, SAS 99 is the Fraud Risk Assessment Standards, right? It talks about one good thing to do is to brainstorm. So get the entire team together early on in the audit, during the audit planning phase, and brainstorm about fraud, right? And one of the things that SAS 99 points to is that in doing so, you help encourage or demonstrate the skepticism. Like it makes everyone on the audit engagement more aware of being skeptical, right, about things. Open, direct communications with people on the job. This is creating and improving the discourse. And then engagement management should encourage questions from the staff. They should, and this is really important, that the partner level, manager level, it should encourage, it should set the tone. So it's sort of like a tone at the top, because the rest of the engagement team is going to follow the lead of the partner. So if you have a partner who focuses excessively on efficiency, look, get it done, I don't want this job going over budget, so forth and so on, right? There's a lot of pressure to come in on budget or under budget. Then if that's the case, right, then what's gonna happen? Then it's likely that people are gonna just focus on getting the job done, and they're not gonna, what did I say? One of the biggest things is time pressure. So that's what they're gonna be under. And that's going to impact their approach to skepticism, or how behaving skeptical, versus a partner that stresses audit quality. Like, I want the job completed, you know, I want to stay on budget, but we have to focus on audit quality, right? We have to, you know, make sure that that we've identified that we develop our audit procedures so we can address the risk of material and safe and effective. And so if that partner sends a different message, that partner sends a message about effectiveness of the audit. And so it's likely that individuals on that audit engagement are going to behave more skeptically. And I use that as an example because there's a research study that shows that, where they did an experiment with audit staff. And they had one group that group was told that the partner focused on efficiency, right? You come in under budget, so forth and so on. And another group where the partner focused on effectiveness. And they seeded some errors and whatever. And they found that the group where the partner focused on the effectiveness of the audit demonstrated a higher level of professional skepticism. They approached the audit, I would say, with a higher level of professional skepticism and acted on it, as compared to the group where the focus was on efficiency. So it matters how the tone that the partner or senior level members of the engagement team demonstrates to the rest of the engagement team. So again, I talked about how skepticism is important in audit, and I think you could see that, like we talked about the judgment framework and just going through the definitions of professional skepticism, the characteristics of professional skepticism, it's probably pretty obvious that those are the characteristics that make sense for an auditor, right? Because we are providing an independent assessment of the fair presentation of the financial statements, right? So we know it's important from that perspective that auditors exhibit that type of those types of characteristics, because it's in the law, right? And this is just an example from the textbook where the Supreme Court outlined the responsibilities of the auditor. In this case, Arthur Young in 1984. Yes?
Where can you find like the auditor's opinion?
Where can you find it?
Yeah, like an example of it.
In chapter 12 in the textbook covers the audit report.
Okay, so there is like a specific language that you would.
Yes, and we're going to cover that toward the end of the semester.
Okay.
But yes, the specific the audit report is a standard report, right? And actually, we'll talk about it. But the auditors have guidelines of when they can issue a clean audit opinion, and what types of opinion they have to issue if they deviate from that. Like if there's situations that cause them to deviate from an unqualified opinion, then what that wording look like. So the audit report is standard. The wording, I don't care if you know what type of company you are. If you have a clean opinion, the audit opinion the wording for a clean opinion is the same across the board.
Okay.
So, if you want to see it, chapter 12 covers that. Right. So in this Supreme Court decision in 1984, it says that these reports are certified. These are public reports, right? So they're released to the public, and they're a report on the financial status of a company. The independent auditor, the key word here, the independent auditor, right, assumes a responsibility to the public by issuing that report. And it doesn't matter what that relationship is. It transcends any employment relationship with the client. So meaning, even though the client hires the auditor's responsibility, the independent auditor's responsibility is to the public. So in other words, they're similar to they could thought of the function of a public watchdog. So the auditor may report to the client, but their responsibility is to the public. And so that was a matter that was settled in the Supreme Court. So there's trust, there's public trust. Yes, Matt.
Since the company that's being audited pays for the audit and the responsibility and the service is kind of being done for the public, is there like a certain standard or like ratio between the cost and like the quality of the audit that's like stated by any government?
No. So, and that's actually a really interesting question, right? Because there's been talk in the past, not recent past, but about the government actually like, kind of being responsible for who audits what. You know, like that it's not this relation. So the government would hire the auditors to audit companies, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not that exactly, but basically that the client wouldn't hire the auditors. If there's, you know, because again, it's like, well, if the auditor is being hired by the client, then how can they be independent of the client if they're being hired by the client? But they're expected to maintain independence regardless of that. They know that. In terms of audit fees, and the other interesting part of that is because now audit fees are disclosed to the public. So it creates a level of transparency so that people can say, well, gosh, they earned a lot of money, right, but you can't equate the cost of the audit to the quality of the audit. It would be very hard to do that, right? And so, and also because what would be difficult to be able to measure that is what does a good, you know, how much should you pay for an audit, right? What is the optimal, and maybe someone can figure it out, I don't know, but what is the optimal audit fee to ensure a quality audit? And the reason that I would challenge that was because you could pay me a lot of money, right? Let's just say for argument's sake, let's say an audit firm gets paid a lot of money to do an audit, and they're not independent. They violated independence in some way. Is that a quality audit?
No.
Right. So that's why, and so if they violate, and so remember, I talked about this briefly, we'll cover it in more detail next week, but there's two types of independence, remember. Independence in appearance, which basically says that you meet all of the requirements of the independence rules, and independence in fact, mental attitude. Well, if I violate independence in fact, you still paid me all that money because I conducted the audit. It's just that I was biased in my decisions. Right? When I was confronted with a complex judgment or subjective nature, I was motivated to side with the client. That would never be able to identify that. Right? That's what's harder to identify. So that's why I think that it's difficult. You can't really say that the more money I spend, the higher my audit quality. Because of those you know, exogenous kind of things that you can't measure. Yes, sir.
Professor, these like the big four, for example, all they talk about is the client wants this, the client's need. It's all about the client. They don't really mention like it's for the public. Like how can you
when you say them? When they talk about the client,
like all it matters are the client's needs. Clients are our priority. Clients. But
right, because it's a service business.
They say we are here for the public. The public is kind of hiring us because we serve the public. It's all about serving their clients.
Right, because it is, and so that's the tension, right? As a challenge, it's because the reality is, even though the audit serves a public good, right? The client still pays them,
exactly. And so there is no really separation. It's kind of hard to think that. How do you trust? Like one is paying you, but you are doing for somebody else. Like it's
right because you have a professional standards and so I'm not saying that your argument is. The expectation is that you are governed by professional standards and regulated, right? Yeah. And so the cost to you, to a firm and not saying that they don't, but the cost to the firm of violating that public trust is even beyond money, right? It's, of course, there's an economic impact of it through litigation, but also reputation and regulatory scrutiny. Look at what happened to Anderson. How many of you heard of Anderson? Right, you heard of them, but I don't think they were around by the time you started your accounting program, right? They were big A. They were big six. I mean, they're gone because it. So that's the cost of it. So that's a powerful, regulatory scrutiny is meant to be a powerful controlling mechanism to try to address this, right? Because you do have concerns that you're absolutely right, and regulators have voiced this concern a lot, right? Is that the client hires the auditor, so the auditor could be motivated to side with the client because they don't want to lose the fees. And that was one of the arguments they made about Anderson with Enron. Is that Anderson was getting so much money between assurance services and at that time advisory services that they just weren't willing to jeopardize that fee. So the thing, what happens is in a regulatory, what regulators try to do is to address that, and it doesn't address it 100%, and it never will. There's no certain 100% certainty that auditors will not impair their independence, because of independence, in fact, and mental attitude. And sometimes, they're not even, I don't believe that they consciously say, I'm gonna impair my independence today. They don't. You justify. Think about when there's rationalization, right? You can think about how many times, I can tell you how many times I rationalize why I should have a piece of chocolate cake and go off my forever diet, right? All the time, right? So we could even though I know it's bad, right? I know it's sabotaging my efforts, I do it.
Yeah, it's in human nature.
Because it's good. I'm tired of denying myself. Right? It's human nature. So we don't, so that's the whole idea behind independence and mental. How do you regulate that? And I don't think that you can completely regulate it away. And so there's the effort to continuously talk about audit quality, continuously make auditors aware of those environments or those contexts that would jeopardize it. The importance of, it's bigger than, this is, bad decisions hurt more than you, right? It hurts the firm. Someone asked me in my class, because we were talking today about independence, in my other class, and they said, well, what about, and I always use the Anderson example, but so well, what happened to those other people? Did they go to other firms? And, so I said, yeah, because they didn't do anything wrong. Think about the people who were in the New York office or, the Chicago office. When the firm went out of business, they lost their jobs. Well, some of them started fleeing before that because their handwriting was on the wall. But they went to, other firms. And they didn't do anything. But it had a bigger impact because even though they went to other firms, could you imagine at that time that happened, saying you worked at Arthur Anderson? How because people would just normally assume it was a bad firm. And it wasn't that it was a bad firm, it was a firm, it was a good firm, but they had some, partners and audit engagements that did some really bad things. And it ended up having a catastrophic effect on the rest of the firm. And so that's, I think, what firms try to impress on, when they talk about the importance of independence, they talk about skepticism and judgment, is what you do could have, if you're not mindful of these things, it could have a catastrophic effect on other people. So, but back to your question about it's a service business. Even if we had, that when I talk about the government, it's we have this pool of money, how would that even work? Let's just think about our government for a while and figure out if we really want them managing a pool of some money, right? So, but how do you do that, right? Do you have a pool and then, right? Because auditing is so much about relationships, and really understanding the client over a period of time. And but what some of the things they do is, like, to address some of what you just raised, is rotate. But this is only for publicly held companies. Is rotate the audit partner after 5 years. Right? So those relationships that you're building up, there's no point in you you take away some of the incentive to align with the client, even though you know you shouldn't. You take away some of that incentive because you're not focused on trying to keep that client. Because you're going to rotate off that client anyway. So your status in the firm is not impacted by whether or not you're still on that client. I mean, it's an ongoing issue and concern, and so the best that we can do is training and development, and then the mechanisms that the government has, the PCOB inspecting, so there's accountability. And so accountability is another big mechanism to try to guard against auditors siding with their clients, being biased and less objective. Is accountability. So now the quality control standards that the firm has in place, the fact that now for publicly held companies, the auditors are inspected by the PCOB, the audit engagement is inspected by the PCOB. So all of those things are things to try to deal, because the structure of the audit, right? The audit environment is not going to change. We're still, I highly doubt that we're going to reach a time when the government is engaged in deciding, telling public companies, put this money in a pool and we'll pay the auditors, we'll hire and fire the auditors. The other thing that they did with after Sarbanes-Oxley is that the client management no longer hires or fires the auditor. So the auditor, in a sense, is no longer working for the client management, but they're working for the shareholders, because the audit committee hires the client. The auditor. The audit committees could hire and fire the client. The auditor. And so that's another way. So the incentive there was that if audit firms are not worried about having to please men because they don't want to get fired, right? So if they're not worried about that, if that's taken away from, if that's taken out of the equation because client management can't fire them, then maybe they, that helps them be more objective and more accountable to what the public trusts. Because the audit committee is not a part of management, right? The audit committee they have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. And so by having the auditors report to the audit committee, or having the audit committee control that process, should align incentives with the shareholders. The challenge with that, though, is that the audit committee does what they're supposed to do. So is the audit committee one that is an audit committee of substance, meaning that they challenge the auditors, they ask good questions, they'll push back on management, right? That they take their fiduciary responsibility very serious? Or is it an audit committee that just meets the form of the audit committee, that they have an independent person, they're independent, that they have a personal financial knowledge, but but what do they do, right? And so some audit committees are very, take it very seriously, and I'm sure that there are other audit committees out there who just don't, right? And so that relationship is only as good as the quality of the audit committee. So it's a product. All right, so we talked about this already. Why it's important. So some of the impediments to professional skepticism, so those are going to be impediments that are internal versus impediments that are external to the auditor. So we talked about the pressures, time pressures, but management pressures auditors as well, right? So if you think about where professional skepticism is hugely important, is when auditors find themselves in situations that require a great deal of judgment, right? Where there are, several plausible alternatives or options. And so clients, especially, if it's within the bounds of GAAP, a client will push back and say, well, show me in GAAP where it says I can't do this. I know my business better than you do. I'm telling you this is, and so it creates this, look, we need to finish, we don't have time for this, blah, blah, blah. At one point, clients would use the threat to fire the auditor. Or I'm gonna have you removed from I don't want you on this, I want you removed from this engagement. So there's all kinds of things. So clients pressure auditors, like, come on, we can do it, we'll fix it next quarter, whatever. So there's the pressure that they find themselves under from the client, as well as the time pressure. That's the high workload demands, especially for large publicly held companies that have a very short window before they have to file their financial statements, the 10K, right? That's a short window. And that's why busy season, some of you have interned, right? So I don't think really intern during busy season. But busy season is crazy. And that's why they call it busy season for a reason. Because there's no choice, right? You have to, the clients have to close. Like they have to file their 10K by a certain time. But usually those clients you would hope are more sophisticated, and so they have mechanisms in place to ensure that, but it still creates a very high workload demand. Avoiding significant conflicts with management, and this kind of gets to Ron's point that, you're working for the client, right? So how are you gonna fulfill your responsibilities in the client is paying you? But the auditor has to, navigate that and recognize, and that's again a part of recognizing what incentives drives management. So are they, and also, one of the things that we know is that if you're a publicly held company, you care about analyst followings, because analysts are following you. And that's what people are looking at. They're looking at what are the analyst recommendations, what are the analysts saying about this company. And so once your forecasted earnings, they're trying to meet it. You see this all the time in the popular press. Companies are trying to meet those forecasted earnings numbers. Right? And so auditors have to be aware of the environment that they're in. And because management's going to push back on these things. If it runs the risk that they could miss earning projections, right, or EPS numbers, they're going to push back. Right? They're going to push back on booking things. Again, I talked about the deadlines that they face. They do care about client satisfaction, right? They care about it because even, when companies put an audit out for bid, so another company goes out, one of the things that they'll say is, well, can I contact some of your existing clients to talk about client service, right? And so that client, you don't want your client saying, oh, well, they're a big four firm and they know what they're doing, but they are, right? They're not that great, or they're paying, and you want them to say, you want your clients to say good things about you. So they do care about client satisfaction because it is a business. There's always pressure on audit fees, and there's always pressure there's that pressure to keep audit fees low. And what are your audit fees are going to be driven, right? About if in a perfect world, you can charge the client for every single hour you need that you put in that audit engagement, right? Times whatever your fee is by your hourly billing rate is by the level of an auditor. That's the perfect world. But clients are pushing back on that, right? Because they don't want to pay a lot of money. There's a concern. There was the concern about should we rotate audit firms off? Like that was discussed at one point. Should audit firms be rotated off the client after a certain period of time? Well, that didn't fly, it didn't happen, so now they're rotating off the engagement partner. Another thing that was meant to address this is that audit partners and even managers found themselves, there being pressure put on them to cross-sell other services. Well, for publicly held clients, this is kind of taking a step, this is not as big a deal, because audit firms they can't provide advisory services for their audit clients. So those types of things are meant to address these impediments, to help mitigate some of the challenges auditors face in trying to, be skeptical, right? And then when we talked about judgment biases, we talked about the unconscious biases that we have as individuals, just as human beings, and how that can impact auditors. Other things would be difficult clients, tough judgment calls. So if you audit, and that's the importance of planning, right? Is understanding what the client's transactions, what transactions are going to create probably more complexity for the auditor, and then ensure that they staff it appropriately. That you have, so if you have a client where there's it's a financial services client with a lot of fair value measurement at the level 3 fair value measurement. Well, then the auditor would have to know that the likelihood is that they're going to need a valuation specialist as a part of the engagement team. So they plan for that. So you want to make sure that those are the kinds of things you know, being aware of potential fraud or what the economic environment is and how your client is impacted by that environment. And then what actions firms can take. We talked about some setting the tone, right? Engagement partners can set the tone to say, and stress the importance of professional skepticism on the job. Firms can take the position of ensuring that, one, auditors are trained, they're made knowledgeable about situations where their professional skepticism can be challenged, what those impediments are. And then auditors is just make yourself aware of situations, what firm resources are out there, being willing to ask questions and suspend judgment, paying attention to what good judgment looks like, and being aware of your client's environment as well. So let's do a couple of let's do one knowledge check and then we'll break for today. The answer is A.
What?
A, right? So it is always a good idea to begin the audit of a professional with an attitude, the mindset, professional skepticism, right? That management team is generally trying to put its best foot forward, trust, when reporting their financial statement information. The auditor must make sure that management team does not violate the accounting rules in doing so. In essence, this statement characterizes why professional skepticism is required to be exercised. Trust but verify. So numbers are verifiable. That's what you're gonna, that's what you're gonna verify. But that's not the reason that you need to be skeptical. All right, guys, have a great weekend.